You need to hear this right now, because this is one of those moments where the mask slips a laugh, a sharp, unmistakable laugh from leaders who understand power, aimed at a claim that was supposed to sound strong. Tariffs as the best ad ever.
Really, here's why that laugh matters to you. Because when politicians sell fantasy, you pay the price in higher bills, fewer jobs, more instability. This isn't about personalities. It's about whether the people shaping global trade actually understand the system they're playing with. And today, that understanding or lack of it was exposed in seconds. This is a turning point, a signal, a warning. Stick with me. Because by the end of this report, you'll see why this moment shook confidence, why it changes the balance of credibility, and why the story starts here, with tariffs framed as ads crashing straight into economic reality. Tariffs framed as ads collide with economic reality. And that collision happened in real time when Mark Carney stood beside Doug Ford and laughed. Not smirked, not smiled, laughed, because calling tariffs the best ad ever assumes the economy responds to marketing language. It doesn't. Economies respond to costs, incentives, production timelines, and supply chains. That laugh wasn't casual. It was instinctive. The kind of reaction you have when someone says something so disconnected from how the system actually works that you don't even need to argue back. You recognize it instantly. Tariffs are not messaging tools. They are blunt instruments that raise input costs, jam logistics, and force companies to make fast, painful adjustments. When Trump framed them as promotional devices for American manufacturing, Carney and Ford heard something else entirely. A policy sold as persuasion instead of production. And that is the problem. Manufacturing doesn't relocate because of slogans. It relocates when capital investment, labor availability, infrastructure, and long-term stability align. None of that happens overnight. None of that happens because a tariff exists. And none of that happens without consequences that land directly on workers and consumers long before any factory ribbon is ever cut. Canada's leadership signals confidence, not fear, and that confidence is exactly what made the moment land. Carney and Ford didn't rush to microphones. They didn't issue threats. They didn't posture. They laughed because they understand their position in the system. Canada isn't reacting from weakness here. It's reacting from integration. Ontario's economy is stitched into the U.S. economy so tightly that parts cross the border multiple times before a single vehicle is finished. Steel, aluminum, auto components, energy. These are not national silos. They are shared production ecosystems. So when tariffs are pitched as weapons, Canadian leadership doesn't panic. They calculate. They know that tariffs aimed at Canada don't isolate Canada. They reverberate through American factories, American jobs, American consumers. That's not arrogance. That's structural awareness. Confidence comes from knowing how the machine works, not from yelling louder about how tough you are. Tariffs framed as ads collapse under even the simplest economic pressure test. If tariffs were advertisements, prices would fall as demand rises. The opposite happens, costs go up. Producers pass those costs along. Demand tightens, output slows. This isn't theory, it's pattern. And leaders who have governed through supply shocks, inflation spikes, and post-pandemic recovery know this. That's why the laughter wasn't cruel. It was reflexive, because pretending tariffs are promotional tools ignores the basic mechanics of capitalist production. Firms exist to preserve margins. When margins are threatened, they adjust by cutting costs, delaying investment, or raising prices. That's the chain reaction. And no amount of patriotic framing interrupts it. Canada's leadership signals confidence, not fear. And that confidence is strategic. By laughing, Carney and Ford sent a message without escalating rhetoric. They signaled that Canada is not scrambling, not cornered, not improvising. They are watching a familiar cycle play out: aggressive trade language followed by domestic economic pressure. They know that tariffs don't stay abstract. They show up in procurement budgets, manufacturing schedules, and household expenses. They show up fast, and leaders who understand this don't need to shout.
They wait for the numbers to do the talking. The laughter also reframed the narrative. Instead of reacting to Trump's claim, it exposed its fragility. If tariffs were truly the best ad ever, they wouldn't need to be sold so hard.
They would speak for themselves in investment data, wage growth, and production output. But when policy requires constant hype, it's often because its real-world effects are mixed at best. Carney and Ford recognized that instantly their response wasn't defensive. It was dismissive. And dismissiveness in politics is power. Canada's leadership signals confidence, not fear, because confidence comes from preparation. Canada has already navigated tariff battles before. They've diversified trade relationships, reinforced domestic supply resilience, and invested in industrial strategy. That doesn't mean immunity, it means readiness. And readiness changes how leaders react in public. When you know your position, you don't flinch at bluster.
You respond with calm, or in this case, laughter. Tariffs framed as ads also misunderstand the timeline of economic change. Manufacturing capacity cannot be switched on like a campaign ad. It takes years to site factories, train workers, secure materials, and stabilize output.
Tariffs disrupt those timelines. They don't accelerate them. And leaders who've managed real economies know that disruption without planning produces volatility, not growth. That's why the claim fell flat. And that's why the reaction was instant. Canada's leadership signals confidence, not fear, and it also signals alignment. Carney and Ford represent different political lanes, but in that moment, they spoke the same language, economic reality that matters. Because when leaders across levels of government align on fundamentals, it shows institutional coherence. It tells markets, investors, and workers that decisions are being made with a shared understanding of risk and consequence. That kind of unity doesn't come from slogans. It comes from governance. The laughter wasn't accidental. It was communicative. It told audiences at home and abroad that Canada isn't buying the narrative and doesn't need to. It told manufacturers that someone in leadership understands how their costs work. It told consumers that the theatrics don't match the math. And it told Washington quietly but clearly that trade policy built on bravado will always run into the wall of economic structure. Tariffs framed as ads collide with economic reality. And when that collision happens in public, the reaction matters. Carney and Ford didn't argue because they didn't need to. The claim dismantled itself, and Canada's leadership, confident in its understanding of the system, let that dismantling happen in real time. Laughter exposes weakness in tariff-driven politics the moment it breaks through the performance. When leaders laugh, it signals they are not threatened, not reactive, not buying the premise. It shows the claim cannot withstand scrutiny. Tariff-heavy politics relies on projection of strength, but laughter punctures that illusion instantly. It reframes the moment from confrontation to credibility. Integrated supply chains make tariff shocks unavoidable. And this is where the weakness becomes structural. Modern manufacturing is not national. It is networked. Parts cross borders repeatedly. Costs stack fast, and disruptions ripple outward. Tariffs don't land cleanly on rivals. They ricochet through factories, jobs, and prices on all sides. That interconnected reality turns political bravado into economic vulnerability in real time. Consumers, not countries, pay tariff costs, and the evidence shows up immediately at the checkout line and in monthly bills. Tariffs raise input prices, companies pass them forward, and households absorb the shock long before any policy benefit appears. That reality strips away the patriotic framing. Political theater meets balance. Sheet math the moment prices move and margins tighten. Applause fades. Spreadsheets don't. When leaders sell tariffs as strength, markets respond with costs, not cheers. The gap between rhetoric and reality becomes visible fast, and once consumers feel it, the narrative collapses under its own weight.
Cross-border manufacturing faces renewed uncertainty as tariff threats resurface and production planners are forced to pause.
Investment decisions stall, contracts are re-examined, and timelines stretch as firms brace for higher costs and regulatory friction. That hesitation ripples through jobs and output before any policy is finalized. Symbolic bravado fails real world economics when gestures collide with supply schedules, financing terms, and labor planning. Markets don't respond to slogans, they respond to risk. The louder the rhetoric, the clearer the uncertainty becomes, and uncertainty is the fastest way to slow an integrated economy. Leaders align against performative trade policy as patience with headline economics wears thin. When experienced officials respond with calm or laughter, it signals a shared understanding that substance matters more than spectacle. That alignment reassures markets and industries watching closely for stability. Market consequences overpower campaign slogans. The moment policies touch prices, jobs, and investment flows. Voters may hear promises, but businesses feel costs. And when costs rise, narratives lose power. Economic gravity takes over, pulling political messaging back to reality where results, not rhetoric, decide credibility. Let's be crystal clear that laughter wasn't casual. It was informed. It was confident. It was the sound of leaders who know how the global machine actually runs, watching political theater collide with hard math. What was revealed here is bigger than one comment. It's a widening gap between those who perform strength and those who manage consequences. And you cannot afford to ignore that gap because when policy is built on bravado instead of structure, the fallout lands on everyday people first. This moment matters globally, and it matters personally. It's a reminder to stay alert, to question the slogans, and to watch who understands the system and who's just talking into a microphone. This is USA World Reports, and our job is to make sure you see the power shifts before they hit your life. If you felt the urgency of this report, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Subscribe, stay connected, and stay informed. Because the world is moving fast and the stakes are real, another major shift is already forming, and we'll be here to break it down. So you stay ahead, not caught off guard.